Hello everyone, my name is Rob Rochema. I'm a distinguished professor of regenerative culture at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, and I want to talk about nature and landscape-driven urbanism today. What is essential in this and why do we need to do this is that there is a huge adaptation gap between the short term and the local scale and the long term and the large scale. So that means that a lot of plans and developments are focusing on the short term, basically instigated by the politics, and on the local scale of mostly economic vested interests. So somewhere in the middle between the long-term and large scale and the short-term and the local scale, we need to connect the scales again. This is what I call landscape-driven urbanism. Also, the connection between the time scales need to happen, and that's what I call nature-driven urbanism. Landscape-driven urbanism is understanding the landscape before we plan every other thing inside that. So we start with how the landscape actually appears. The elevation, the water system, nature and ecology. Then we decide about what kind of zones we need to plan to safeguard the environment for the flood-prone zones. And within that system, a third step is then filling in those and embed urban fields within that system. Finally, that urban system is supported by the infrastructure. Nature-driven solutions are something a little bit different than nature-based solutions. So nature is not something from a different and faraway planet, or something you add to the city, or some little space you enter into the city. It should be the driving force for creating regenerative cities. This philosophy of eco-cathedric regions focuses therefore on eco-time, eco-space, and ecocracy. So the first one, eco-space, sees nature as a designer. The nature should actually design the space for natural developments. The occupation freely, the dynamics of nature determine what kind of urban lookout, spatial configuration will be there. For instance, the plan for a floodable Eems Delta region in the north of the Netherlands. The sea enters the landscape and determines what kind of land use and design of the landscape could happen. Talking about eco-time, nature becomes the conductor of what happens. So we need to take a long-term view for determining what kind of transformation the landscape could go through. Eventually, the natural cycles will determine the patterns in the landscape on the longer term. And finally, ecocracy sees nature as a decision maker. It co-decides on what kind of future a certain area needs to go to, as in the form of being part of the council or the CEO in the boardroom. In this sense, we need to understand what nature would think, what nature would decide if it could decide on the future of its own environment without interference of human beings. And all these together, eco-space, eco-time, and ecocracy, together they form an eco-cathedric region. A region that is developing in a natural way, driven by nature, and together with the planning and the demands of the environment, will determine what kind of future will happen. It's not only about time and space and decision making. It's also about what kind of scales do we look at. We need to look at the scales throughout, from the balcony in your backyard to the entire world. In the middle of this range of scales, we find the regenerative urban landscape at the regional level. So from the global to the regional landscape, we can have some examples on the global scale, connecting ecosystems throughout the world. We can also look at a continental level. In Australia, connecting different spaces and areas through ecology. At a subcontinental level, we can see a development of greening spaces throughout a subcontinent. At the national level, we can connect and redesign the land a land or a nation for the better and for nature. At the regional scale, we can connect the urban water system and the ecological system with each other, allowing the dynamics on the longer term for the planet. And when we think from the bottom up, from the balcony to the regional landscape, we can start designing roofs of houses ready for food production. We can think about what kind of future the trees in our environment would like to see. We can use the water system, the local water system, to design and determine the urban design in the city. In the city, we can connect then the parks with each other in order not to isolate them from each other. In this way, there is a green grid emerging throughout the urban region. And again, at the regional level, we can allow for the dynamics of the landscape and our environment to determine what is going to happen in the future. So this is what I call nature-driven and landscape-driven urbanism. Thank you.